So good afternoon, everyone. We'll be talking today about website caching, and we'll just do a quick round of introductions for our presenters today, and we'll get underway. So I'll turn it over to Kevin to introduce himself.
Hi, so my name is Kevin Parras. I'm a Drupal developer at Evolving Web. I'm happy to be here today.
Thanks, Kevin. And my name is Jesse. I am a solutions architect, also from Evolving Web. I'm been a full stack developer and working on various platforms, including Drupal. And real quick, what is Evolving Web? We are a team of digital leaders in technology, strategy, design, and development. We're a team of about 80 plus team members now. I've been specializing in Drupal for about 15 years. And we build all kinds of websites and focus on design for inclusion and accessibility, user-centric approach to design, mobile-first approach, data-driven decision-making, and of course, security and stability baked into all of our websites. We work with organizations from all around the world and that want to make a big impact. Just some of the examples of some of the teams that we've collaborated with, many university clients over the years. You can see a whole list here. We do both design and develop of websites, but also provide a ton of training both for our clients as well as anybody sort of externally as well. We have a bunch of training classes that we'll touch on quickly at the end of our session today. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about caching. So we're going to cover what is caching, how a web request works, all the different types of cache that is involved. We'll go through sort of the overview of a request and some hosting platforms, some Drupal caching specifics, as well as common issues caused by caching, some debugging tips, and then we'll make sure that we have some time for some Q&A at the end if anybody has any follow-up questions. There's this common saying when talking about websites and caching specifically that there are only two hard things in computer science, cache invalidation and naming things. There's some other variations of that, but that's more or less what why we're going to talk about this today. Basically to help people understand what caching is and make your life on the web a little bit easier. So let's first talk about cache. So what is it? Well, it's not this cache, but I'll give you just a quick quote here from Cloudflare, somebody that we'll talk about a little bit as well. Caching is the process of storing copies of files and other data in a cache or a temporary storage location so that they can be accessed more quickly. And that doesn't necessarily, again, mean just files. It could be any number of things. Usually it's pieces of data in general. But this quote kind of summarizes it nicely. And again, it includes a whole bunch of things like static assets such as images, parts of web pages, and even full web pages could be included in a cache. What are the different types of cache? We have a whole bunch of different places where caching can happen. First one, most commonly, is in a web browser. And those are typically assets such as images, JavaScript, CSS, font files, those kinds of things, as well as maybe like web applications like when you're on your mobile device and you do the sort of add to home screen feature, those sort of downloads an application to your your device and sort of caches it or keeps a local copy of it for you. There's also network caching, and there's a whole range of things that can happen all along the network between the browser and the sort of end server. And there's two sort of main ways that happens. There's a proxy server or also a reverse proxy server, which is otherwise usually known as a content delivery network. I'll show you a little bit more about what that means in a moment. But when we're talking about network caching, these are kind of the two main things that are involved. When you think about a proxy, those are probably less common these days. They were used a lot for companies to try to save some bandwidth. As an example, if you think about 10 people in an office all visiting the same website, it doesn't make sense to necessarily have each one of them have to request that same image over and over again, when you could just have a local server in your office that's going to keep a copy of that and serve that instead. So it can really help make things faster and save some bandwidth there. And when we talk about a CDN, or the reverse proxy example, that's sort of, again, it's sort of the reverse example, where if you're browsing a website from your computer, it'll make it faster by just going somewhere a little bit closer to get the files, like, again, the images and full web pages. And I'll show you a diagram of that in a second to help clarify that. And if we talk about server-side caching, so there's a number of different ways that happens, and there's a couple of different scenarios there. There's sort of an output cache and an in-memory cache. And here we're talking about full-page outputs. We're talking about database requests. Maybe there's objects that are involved in some of that. And basically, it's a way to avoid having to regenerate or request things multiple times. And again, that could be things like a full page or even a piece of a page, but it could also be network requests, such as, the good example is if you go to a website and it displays the company's Twitter feed on the homepage. Well, rather than having to let each visitor to that website wait for a response from Twitter before sending a response back to the visitor, usually the web server would just hang on to a copy of that Twitter feed, because they don't change every minute. They might change every 15 minutes or every day. So there's no need to regenerate that and wait on Twitter to respond before responding back to a visitor of your website. And things like database requests, might be doing some things with some complex computations to show some statistics or something like that. So if we can keep some of those things in a server-side cache, it'll just make it faster to respond to those. So in a high level, those are sort of the main areas of cache that we're going to talk a little bit more about, some more than others. But I mentioned getting more towards talking more about the CDN. So this is an example of how a content distribution network would work. And basically what we see is, we're trying to find a way to reduce the physical distance between a visitor and the end web server. So if you have somebody in Montreal who's wanting to visit a website that might be hosted in a data center, say in New Jersey, there's caching services, which are, again, the CDNs, that will keep a copy of the web page output or the images or the JavaScript files, all those different assets, closer to that visitor. So if we only need to go to the server here in Montreal, it's just, you can imagine how that physical distance, cutting off a bunch of that distance, can help make it that much faster for somebody to visit the website. And then similarly, somebody who's in Denver would have a similar experience if they can just go to a caching server in Denver instead. And so that's a great way to reduce the times there. The good two examples of those I mentioned previously, Cloudflare, but also Fastly, and there's Azure CDNs. There's a whole bunch of different companies that offer those types of services. So now I want to talk a little bit about what a web request looks like. This is kind of important to understand how we can help use caching to our advantage, but also how it can cause some issues. So this is like a general overview of what it kind of looks like when somebody makes a request to a website. They'll say they're requesting the evolving web about page. Their browser is going to go out to the internet and find the sort of end web server, and it's going to do a bunch of work to send some data back to the browser, including the HTML, images, JavaScript, and whatnot. And it has to do a whole bunch of work to get that. It might have to talk to a backend programming language like PHP in the case of Drupal. And then that's going to do a whole bunch of other work, like requesting, as I mentioned, things like a Twitter feed or information from its databases. And it might have to do that multiple times for different data stores. It might request from Twitter, but maybe also Facebook, and maybe also Instagram, but then also connecting to a whole bunch of different databases. So you can see with the sort of amount of things that happen in the background why it's important to try to speed some of that up for the end users. And really what we're trying to do is just reduce all these different blue lines in here. We want to try to cut some of those off and make that process go faster. If we can stop the browser from having to ask the server by serving an image, for example, from the browser cache, then that's going to be faster. Or if we can stop the server from having to make a request to PHP, that's also going to help make that whole process faster. Maybe we can also stop PHP from having to ask its database for or one of the data stores for more information. That'll again to help make the response faster. So that's all where caching can kind of come into play along sort of each part of that. So that's generally the goal, is to try to make some of that faster by hopefully eliminating some of those requests. But there's potential issues if you are a little bit too maybe aggressive with that. If you're caching things too much, you might end up with some common issues that we're going to also talk about in a few moments. One of the most common being just outdated information. Somebody might not see the most current information on your website. So to go sort of behind the scenes now and actually look at what a request looks like, this is kind of a preview of what happens in the background when a visitor goes to visit the About page on a website. It basically sends these sort of sets of instructions from the browser and sends them along the way to the different servers that it might come into contact with. And it's kind of got all this different metadata here that really help with caching. And these are known as headers, but they're also sort of like, you can think of them as hints. So if we look at sort of this first line, what we see is somebody's requesting the About page on the Evolving Web website. This next line here is instructing the server to only respond if the resource that it's requesting, in which this case is the web page, is newer than a certain date. So the server might know that this web page hasn't been updated in a couple of months, and the browser has already visited this page, so it might not need to actually request or respond with that information anymore. Then we also have something here that's sort of, it's known as like a hash, and it's sort of like a unique identifier for a specific version of a file. So, it seems like it's just sort of a random string of letters and numbers, and it kind of just is, but it does have some meaning to the machines along the way, and it will mean that, they can optimize and make things faster by not responding with a whole bunch of new, rather a whole bunch of information that is already available to something along the line like the browser. Now, the server along the way has to then respond with some information. So this is sort of what that will look like. We have a whole bunch of again, more sort of hints in here, and each one of these is going to be helpful for sort of understanding what's happening. So again, this first line here is pretty important. So this 304 is it's an HTTP code, and it's basically saying, it's a code of saying what kind of response is being sent. In this case, it means not modified. And so it's saying that because of the dates and because of the other hints that the visitor's browser has sent, the server knows it doesn't need to respond back with duplicate information, because the browser has that information already. And it knows that because of a couple of things here. The first one being there's a basically max age, which is saying how long should the browser hang on to a copy of the information. In this case, it's saying, basically it's 1 day, and it uses again that hash, that unique identifier of that version, to know that nothing has actually changed. So this number on this page actually matched the one on the previous one. So we know that content hasn't actually changed, and there's no need to send it all over again. And lastly, we can also look at where the request was actually served from. So as I shown in the diagram earlier, there's a whole bunch of things, a bunch of places along the way where something could be cached and sent from. So in this case, it actually didn't get all the way to that hypothetical server in New Jersey. It stopped at a caching server in Montreal instead, which might be local to the visitor. So it's much closer, physically closer, and that generally means it'll actually be faster to respond to that. So these, again, are sort of known as the headers, and you can think of them as sort of like hints, and you can always look at them to help understand what's happening with caching behind the scenes. This same sort of process, this sort of conversation of a request and a response, has to happen more or less for every resource on a website, and that's going to include the actual page itself, but that includes then all the sub-resources like the images and the JavaScript files and CSS files and all of that kind of stuff. So you can imagine if you go to a web page that has a whole bunch of images, this happens a number of times. Maybe it's 20 times, more than likely it's 70 times or 100 times or even more. So you can see where if we can cut off some of those and make them happen faster, it can really help to speed that whole web page loading process up. So to go back to my previous example, what we've effectively done is cut off the request. We don't have to go to all of this stuff here on the side. On the right, we just basically stop at the content distribution network, which might have been that it had that information already available because somebody else had visited that website recently, and so it had it ready to go closer to the user, and was able to respond with that. It also was actually, in this case, was able to respond with a response saying, you don't need a new version because you already have the old version. So we kind of did two things. We sped it up because we were able to tell the visitor's browser it already has the up-to-date information, but we were also able to do that much closer by going to a closer location here in the content in the CDN. So again, I mentioned that sometimes if that happens, if this is all happening maybe too aggressively, there's too many caches along the way, it can mean that we start to see some outdated information. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that all of that can be controlled and managed. And usually it does depend on the hosting provider and the CMS. Drupal, of course, has all of its own sort of modules to help with all of that, and as do the different hosting companies. So I'm actually going to now turn it over to Kevin to talk about our couple of hosting providers and some of the other issues that might come up here.
Hi. So yeah, all of this caching stuff depends on how the infrastructure for your site has been set up. So of course, this will depend on where you are hosting your site. So we look at two popular hosting platforms and how the things are usually set up with them. I don't know if it's only me, but it's getting like super slow when you are transitioning the slide. So hopefully we can make it go. But yeah, anyway. So okay, it's better there. Thank you. So for example, in Akia, so if you remember on one of the first slides that Jesse was talking, he mentioned briefly object cache. So this is where the backend language, in this case PHP, will store some of the stuff that it generates. It's not necessarily the full page, but some of the stuff that it needs along the way. So Akia for this object cache uses main cache. Also, Akia has two different main offerings for the hosting product. It could be Akia Cloud Platform or Akia Cloud Platform Enterprise, and depending on that, you get different things. So by default, every configuration includes varnish that will be in front of the web server. So that's one layer of cache. And you can also get a CDN in front of that. And if you need, you could also put your own CDN there. So in any case, at minimum, you will have one more layer above the web server. So that's something that we need to keep in mind when we are setting up cache and stuff when we are hosting on Akia. So next, please. In the case of Pantheon, for the object cache, Pantheon uses Redis, and for the CDN uses Fastly. There is an offering which is named Global CDN that is included in all of the plans, but also there is the Advanced Global CDN that has some special advanced features that it's offered as an add-on. Again, both of them, both Global CDN and Advanced Global CDN, runs on Fastly. So that's the CDN that we use if we are hosting on Pantheon. And again, this is something that we need to keep in mind when we are setting up the caching for our websites. So next slide. Drupal caching. So in Drupal, we have different levels of cache bins. Some of them will be used when you are generating the final page. So here are only some examples. Of course, Drupal have lots and lots of other bins. So for example, we have the views cache, we have the blog cache, the page cache, and the dynamic page cache. So for today, we are going to be focusing on the page cache. That is a cache item that will be the whole page that has already been built for the request. So next slide, please. So in Drupal, we have, starting from Drupal 8, the caching has been improved a lot. So now we have three main elements that we can use to control the cache in Drupal. So we have cache context, cache tags, and cache max age. So if we talk about cache context, then we should ask ourselves, what makes this content that I'm creating to change? So let's say that content could change depending on the user role, that content could change depending on the URL or depending on the query param. So the answer to that question will be the cache context. If we talk about the cache tags, then we need to ask ourselves, what makes this content to be outdated? So let's say we have a list of nodes. So what makes that list of nodes to be updated? If it's showing, let's say, the top recent 5 items, then of course, if I create one new item, then the list will be outdated and needs to be regenerated. So that's the cache tags. What makes this to be outdated? And of course, our old friend max age, that's usually not really used a lot nowadays in Drupal, but it's still there as a fallback. So if you need some content to be outdated after a specific amount of time, then of course you could go ahead and use max age. Normally we set max age to 0, and then we, to -1, and then we only rely on context and tags. So each of these mechanisms that we have available in Drupal to control the cache, they will correlate with some cache headers. So that will finally affect the cacheability of the pages. So that's why cache headers will be really, really important when we are working with cache. And we can look at them, at some of them later. So next slide, please. So of course, we have modules available in Drupal to control the different cache layers that we have. And one of these modules, probably the main module if we have some cache layers on top of our web server, is the Porsche module. This is a generic module that is pluggable, so that means you can use additional modules to define exactly what are we going to push. This is a module that have the ability to ask or request the top layers to push items from the cache. So let's say you have the web server, and on top of that web server, you have a varnish. Varnish will know that it needs to push an item in the cache because the push module will instruct Varnish to do that. Otherwise, Varnish will probably continue serving outdated content, and we definitely don't want that. So push module is really, really useful to do that. Next slide, please. So if we are hosting on Akia, we will use the push module. And on top of that, we will use the Akia push module that will allow our Drupal site to connect with the different caching layers that Akia has. And by using the push module, will allow you to enable various purgers and to configure this module so that you can actually push the items. So this process should be very similar if you're using any of the CDN offerings that Akia has, or even if you are putting your own CDN on top of that. Of course, the differences will be the purgers that you need to configure, but this is the way to do it. Next, please. If you are hosting your site in Pantheon, then there is a module that was created to handle the global CDN, which is the Pantheon Advanced Page Cache module. This is usually just set and forget. You just enable the module. The default configuration will probably be all that you need for your site. and it really works pretty well by default. So as an example, and side at Evolving Web, we had an old version of this module that had a setting that was different to what it is now the default. And we had a problem that whenever we added a new blog post, then the listing of blog posts wasn't updating immediately. Then we looked into the website to know what was going on, and we found out that there was a setting on the module that was changed after the time that we installed the module, and they decided to not change the default behavior of the module, because usually you don't want to do that. People have already installed the module. So we just need to do one change in the config of the module. So that means it will be the same if we had uninstalled and reinstalled the module. And with that, now you publish a new blog post and it will get immediately refreshed in the blogs listing. So as I said, usually set and forget. So really good. Next. So now we will talk about some common issues when you are dealing with cache. So of course, first issue, not caching enough. Let's say that you will be storing on your cache too many variations for a given page. So if I'm a user requesting your website from Costa Rica, and there are really no a reason for your website to serve me a different version that if I'm requesting it from USA or from Canada, then you should serve me exactly the same version. But if your cache is not correctly configured, there may be situations where you are serving a different versions of your website, for example, depending on where the person is located or what browser the person are using, or in general, there are many things that you could use to define different variations for your website, for your pages that you will store in cache. So if you have too many variations for a given page, then your cache may be ineffective and you may actually never be serving cache items. So that's a problem with cache. And another possible cause for that is that your cache is being broken really easily. So how to start looking at this if you want to fix this issue? First, look at your max age header. That may be too low. So maybe it could be something like 1 minute, 5 minutes, or something, and probably it could be more than that. So usually it's recommended that max age is at least 1 hour. Depending on your website, depending on your cache stuff, then it could be either 1 day, similar. So look at your max age header. Also, you look at your body header, which is this header that I was mentioning, that determines what are the things that will make your pages vary, will make your pages different. And of course, start looking at cache tags and cache context, whether they are correctly set for all of the elements in your page, because these cache tags and cache context will definitely affect the cacheability of your page. So look at that, and hopefully you will be able to fix this issue. Next. Stale cache. So Jesse was talking about that. If you are too aggressive to cache, then you may be end with serving outdated content. So a cache item may be too old, was a bit updated, but someone, let's say some server above your web server, doesn't actually know about that, and it's still serving outdated content. So what to look when you need to fix this issue? So first, look at the VM header. This is the header that will tell you who was actually the server that served me this page. Was it the web server? Was it Varnish? Was it the CDN? So this will be your first clue to know what's going on. Also, try breaking your cache using query params in your browser. This will force your browser to go to the first server in the path and request a new version of that. So that may help you to start diagnosing your problem. Also, are your Varnish and CDN modules installed and configured correctly? In the case of Pantheon, the Pantheon Advanced Page Cache module, is it configured correctly? So look at that too. And again, look at the cache tags and cache context where they are correctly set for all of the elements in your page. So these are some steps to start looking at this issue. Next. Missing styles could be another issue. So maybe your site is loading an old version of the CSS or JavaScript files. So again, how to look at that? Start looking at the age header for the files that will tell you when were these files generated. Also, is there really a newer version of them? So open this asset in a new browser tab and add or change the query params to force the browser to fetch them from the server. And that will tell you, okay, there are really new versions of this that I'm somehow not getting, so you can keep looking at why are you not getting them. Drupal has the CSS and JavaScript cache, so maybe you need to clear that specific cache in order to fix your problem. That could be a possible solution for that. Next. So now that we talk about some of the common issues with cache and also how to start investigating what to look at when you need to investigate them. So let's look at some debugging tips for cache. So first, as I told, I think all of the previous slides, look at the headers. Always look at the headers. So how to do that? Of course, you can use your browser inspector, your browser developer tools in order to do that, whether it's Firefox or Chrome, you have the network tab, then you click on the request and you get the headers there. There are also plugins that will help you with that. So for example, if you are using Chrome and there is this HTTP headers plugin that you can install in your browser that will put you a good in the extensions in the plugin section. And when you click on that, you will get all of the headers for this page. So the headers are always the first step that you should take when you are debugging cache issues. So some of the most important headers that we have already talked about: age, vary, cache control, via. Also, there is a header that will tell you where this was a cache hit or a cache miss. And also, there are some debugging headers in Drupal that you could also enable in your services.yaml file that will show you all of the cache tags and all of the cache context. So these are what in this slide is referring as Drupal headers. So these are debugging headers that you can also get. And that will help you to start getting an idea what could be going on in your site and how to fix it. Next slide, please. So of course, another debugging tip could be breaking the cache. So if you requested a page and you know that something should have been changed on that page and it actually didn't, then adding a random query param to your request to your page could help you because it will force your browser to ask the server for a new version of that. You could also, of course, try incognito mode to do the same. And as I said, this will force the browser to request a new version. But if the server that it's getting the request or a CDN or a cache server along the way has an outdated version for that new specific request, then it may also be serving you an outdated version. So this won't fix all of your problems. It will help you to diagnose where is the problem. So next. Of course, in Drupal, we have these magic clear all cache buttons. And we always joke about flushing all the cache before actually trying to look into any issue of Drupal. That may solve your problem, and we usually use it as a first step to try to solve a problem. And sometimes it actually will solve your problem, but this is not really a good solution for your site because flushing all of the cache on your site will impose a high load, especially in your prod site, especially if it's a big site. So that will make the next page request heavier because it will need to generate everything from scratch. Let's think on a heavy site with lots of concurrent visitors, that may be a big hit to the server. So my advice is, if you need to flush all of your caches in order to be able to get updated content every time you do a small change in your website, then I'm pretty sure there is an issue in your site with the cache that needs to be fixed. So try to follow all of these tips and issues that we have talked about today to actually get your root problem fixed and not just keep doing this workaround, because you are really not solving your problem. So next.
Great. So that's what we had to discuss today. I wanted to see if there's any questions or any other thoughts or comments that anyone would like to add at this point. We do have a chat in the Q&A section there. Looks like we had a question about migrating to Drupal 9. I wanted to maybe elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, of course, all of this that we have talked today is on Drupal 8, Drupal 9 cache. So Drupal 7 don't have all of this stuff. So I would say, seems that template changes and CSS changes always needs to be flushed. I think there is a setting, I don't remember the exact name, on settings.php that is attached to what some hosting providers name deployment identifier. So if things are correctly set, then you don't really need to do to be flushing cache. But if you are flushing cache and you're only flushing CSS and JavaScript cache, I'd say it's really not that bad as flushing all of the cache. But yeah, sometimes flushing cache is inevitable.
Yeah, I think we could probably figure out a way to ensure that the slides are available. We'll figure out the logistics around getting those out to everybody. I do know that their sessions are recorded as well, so that'll be available, I'm sure, at some point coming up in the days following as well. Oh, and feel free to pop in with any other questions. We do have, I mentioned we had a bunch of training courses as well available through our evolvingweb.ca website. We have a couple of upcoming courses on advanced module development and Drupal 7 to 9 migration workshops, and a whole bunch of other ones starting in the near term as well. So if anybody was interested in any of those, there's again on our evolvingweb.ca website. And again, if you have any other follow-up questions, feel free to keep in touch, whether it be through our social media channels or my and Kevin's email addresses are here as well. Okay, so there's one more question from I'll let Kevin, wonder if you can handle that one.
I was looking at a question in the chat. Sorry, we'll look at Q&A in a second. We use Cloudflare. What is the best practice for browser cache CTL? So first, Porsche Module in order to get the cache pushing correctly wired. I don't think I've really used Cloudflare, but I just found that there is this Cloudflare Purge module that works with the Purge module that I will do the purge, obviously, for when you do changes in Drupal. So first, I say get this module configured, get it talking to Cloudflare in order to be able to do that. And once that's done, I think you can start increasing your max age, I'd say maybe start with 1 hour as the very minimum. And from there, you can try going, let's say, maybe 6 hours, 12 hours, or something like that. Because if the Porsche module is correctly set up, then most of the time that will be good enough. Have to flash for new templates here, changes to existing one. Was wondering if there was something different about D9. Yeah, D9 is using Twig, of course, and Twig caches everything there. So for local development, there are ways that you can disable all of that caching stuff. For broad deployments and that sort of stuff, I think, yeah, there will still need some cache clearing in order to get those changes there. But if it's for local development, then you can set up the book. You can tweak the book into true, so that will remove the cache layers there, and also some other cache adjustment that you could do in settings PHP.
Okay, great. Well, if there's no further questions, thanks for attending today. As I said, the video recording will be available, and we'll find a way to get the slides out to everybody. And yeah, feel free to keep in touch again. Maybe I'll just pop back to the contact slide here. But yeah, thanks again for attending, and hope everyone enjoys the rest of the day and the sessions.